Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Work From Home Show. Homies, homeboys, homegirls, home trans. I'm your host, Naresh Vissa, with Adam Schrader. And today we have Dr. Edward Tronick with us. He's the Distinguished University Professor of Psychology and Director of the Child Development Unit at UMass Boston. He was the head researcher. This was a while ago. I think it was long before I was born. But he was a researcher of the renowned still face experiment, which we'll talk a little bit about that because I'm curious. I've got a newborn son. He's almost by the time this recording is aired, he's going to be 1 year old. But curious to learn more about that. He's a best-selling co-author of the new book, which is relevant to our current kind of post-pandemic work-from-home situation. The book is called The Power of Discord: Why the Ups and Downs of Relationships Are the Secret to Building Intimacy, Resilience, and Trust. Dr. Edward Tronick, welcome to the Work From Home Show.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations on your 1 year old. How great.
Yes, thank you so much. He's just like any other 1 year old. He's a fun little fella. So let's first talk a little bit, Dr. Tronick, about what are the good emotional habits to practice if our listeners are working from home alone, if they're single, or maybe their spouse is working outside of the house. But what are the good emotional habits to practice when people are working from home, whether they're alone or with their spouses and their families and kids and newborns in my situation?
I think these times are really challenging. Certainly I experience them really as ones that one has to figure out what you need to do. I'm working from home. My wife is here with me, so there are many things that demand adjustment. In my personal experience, what I find is that there are days that I'm really doing well, like today I'm talking to you, but it's probably good you didn't call me up on, say, Saturday when I was not doing quite so well. I get this feeling of being flattened. It's not necessarily depressed, but it's a kind of lack of motivation and it's kind of a lack of attention. What I find helps me most is one, having a routine. It's also what we talk about for our kids, giving them a routine. I find exercising really helps me, especially if it's possible with being careful to exercise with other people. I also think that contacting people and talking to them, doing things like being on Zoom or Skype or whatever, can really help. Although I think there's a weirdness, something unsatisfying about being in contact with people like that, because it brings up the phenomenon that you can't actually be with the people. And most recently, we've had people visiting us we have a small kind of city backyard, little garden, at a real distance. I find that really invigorates me. So self-emotional care takes knowing what are the things that make you feel better, and then doing your best to engage with them. And of course, that's part of the problem. If you're feeling really down, you don't feel like you really want to do something. So you have to push yourself or get someone else to push you.
Yeah, no, I would say one of the things, like when you're talking about feeling flat, kind of a case of the meh. And so if you're dealing with the case of the meh, or you have a spouse or a kid dealing with that, what are some of your advice to deal with that without kind of going overboard in a lot of cases? You know, it's easy to tell your kid, hey, snap out of it, you know, go outside and play, but that's probably not the healthiest way of dealing with it. So what recommendations, what can people do in that situation?
I think it becomes really critical for all of us to not only reflect on be aware of our own moods and how we're feeling, but to really appreciate how difficult it can be for others, including our children. We love to say that the kids are resilient, they'll deal with things, but they're under lots and generated pressure and pressures from the outside. One just needs to think about how they're isolated from their friends. There are all the activities that they'd like to engage in that they're not able to engage in, the places they would like to go. So it's, in fact, not being able to go to school now is something that not all kids, but most kids would really like to be doing, and most children are not doing that. So on the parental side, it becomes a demand, and it's not always easy to fulfill it, to be empathic to the child, to really try and hold a sense of the difficulties that they're having. Which relates to the book and the title, the idea about discord. Right now, we probably all pressure to make our relationships with the people we're isolating with or we're not seeing as smooth as possible. We always want our relationships to be smooth, but the phenomenon is that under the kind of pressure that we're all experiencing now, it becomes even more difficult to have just a smooth relationship. But even more importantly is to recognize that the discord is typical, it's going to happen. It happens in times that are not quite as weird as we're experiencing now, and it happens now. And to not let that upset you, to not let that make you anxious, or to lead you to feeling like, oh, I'm really messing up, I'm really screwing up here. Just recognize the difficulties that we have and then try to overcome and what the particular problem might be.
We have Edward Tronick on the show. That's Dr. Edward Tronick, Distinguished University Professor of Psychology at UMass Boston and author of the new book, The Power of Discord, Why the Ups and Downs of Relationships Are the Secret to Building Intimacy, Resilience, and Trust. Dr. Tronick, talking about the pandemic, the shutdowns, and also an election year. I mean, election years, historically, I'm a little younger than you, but I've been noticing this trend in 2012, 2016. It
really helps people get along?
Well, election years really bring households together, don't they? And I've noticed not just in our household or family members' households, but other people's households might be split or divided about elections and about politics. So what's your advice on the 2020, I guess, 2020 being an election year and coupling that with all the other craziness that's happening?
Again, there's no simple answer to this. I don't think you're asking me for advice about who people should be voting for, but
No.
to understand the kind of polarization that's going on, that we're at a time of really tremendous uncertainty. And one of the consequences of uncertainty when it starts to get extreme is individuals try to, in a way, they tend to shut down because they want not have to deal with the stress. So I think the pandemic, with all its uncertainty, has driven us even further apart. I think we came into it really being polarized. And I think part of that polarization had to do with large segments of our population, individuals who felt disregarded, that they felt uncertain about what their future was. And they were already taking on positions that held to, that helped them to feel like they were, let's say, in control. And the pandemic has exacerbated those kinds of problems. Feeling, again, to overcome the uncertainty is that, how to put this, something like, I am my own agent. I am my own individual. I can take care of myself. I need to hold on to my views of what's going on as strongly as possible, because if I start to consider some of the grays, some of the back and forth, some of the positions of people on the other side, right away I'm introducing more uncertainty, and the uncertainty almost literally becomes pretty frightening and pretty terrifying. So you want to do away with as much of the uncertainty as possible.
You were mentioning kind of dealing with the Zoom factor and how it can make you realize kind of how distant you are. What is the best way to maintain your relationships in this time with your friends who you're not getting to see as much? Because it can be really easy, like if you're online on Facebook or something, to when you're not face to face, it's easy to kind of talk trash behind the keyboard or, you know, a whole bunch of different things. And it can be hard to keep that relationship with outside friends going. You know, how can you do that? What's the way?
I think a key to it, and just let me say, I do very little social media, so
your mental health is better than most then.
Yes.
But I think the way to deal with friends and to maintain relationships is to try and have frequent contact with them. And some of that contact can be short-lived. One of the things I see people doing, patients that I see, friends that I see, is that they set up a sort of special big time to talk with a friend or to talk with their adult children or something like that. Very pressurized. I think a better approach is to do it frequently and to do it often. And some of them can be short-lived and some of them can be longer conversations that begin to take on a more natural quality. I find that to be most effective, for me, most rewarding, and in terms of maintaining contact with my friends, to, in a sense, to choose a word, be kind of chatting with them. You don't have to get everything out every time and deal with how are you doing and all the seriousness of all this. And I think you can do it calls. I think you can do it with texting. I think you can do it with, I use emails. I'm sure other people can do it with social media. But again, not to burden yourself with feeling, oh, this is going to be our absolutely most wonderful connection, and we're going to, have all that feeling that we always have when we're actually face to face and we're, much more casual with one another.
Dr. Tronick, in your book, The Power of Discord, Why the Ups and Downs of Relationships Are the Secret to Building Intimacy, Resilience, and Trust, can you define for us and give examples of ups and downs? What are ups and what are downs?
The ups and downs of relationships are inevitable. I first came to that view by looking at the interactions of parents and their infants who are 4-month-old, 6 months old, or let's say 1 year of age. And what we saw there was our fantasy is that we are always emotionally connected with our children and that our relationships with them are really smooth and go well, or at least that's our fantasy of what the relationship should look like. But what I was able to see in looking at the relationships between parents and their infants was that there were ups, or what I call, which are the mismatches. And the ups would be the big smiles that you share with a 6-month-old, sharing vocalizations, looking, mutual gaze between each other. But then there would be mismatching, which would be the baby looking off to the side, not looking at you, having a kind of distress face or looking sad, or the parent looking off, doing something else. For example, wiping the baby's nose. This is a big mismatch that occurs with, young infants as they're drooling or whatever. Those mismatches make up, on average, about 70% of the time of the interaction. So you're matching about 30% of the time on average and mismatching much of the rest of the time. What's critical is that when you're mismatching, you go back to a matching state. So you go from infant and parent looking off to the side, not engaged with one another, coming back together, sharing a smile, sharing a vocalization. When that occurs, you feel connected to the other person. You feel like, for the infant, trust this other person, and you feel like you're able, you come to know how to interact with one another. That model, I think, applies to adult relationships as well.
Yeah, I think just being present tends to be something that we underlook or overlook, whichever, that we tend to discount with our children. Is sometimes, even if you're not, fully engaged with them, but just being in the room and being present is, a really big thing for them. Is that enough? Like, is that one of your kind of the not matching ones that you're talking about?
I think when you're present in the room and your child is playing, that it's in fact a kind of support or scaffold that you're providing to the child. So in that sense, it's a kind of matching. You're not actively engaged with one another, but the child is aware of your presence. And if the child is engaged in doing something, your presence provides them with a sense of security and safety so that they don't have to worry about, is everything okay? Am I safe here? Is it okay for me to guide themselves to focus on what it is that they want to do without worrying about other things? One context that you might see this in really clearly is if you take your child out to a playground and the child wants to climb up on a slide or do something on the bars or whatever it is that they want to do. And what you're doing as the parent is you're watching them doing that. You're making your presence known. You might say something to every once in a while, but you're not actively trying to help them climb the slide. You're not actively picking. You're letting them do that on their own. But your presence helps the child to feel safe to do it on her own, to follow their own intentionality. And if you weren't there, explore and engage in the activities that they're engaged in. And that happens at the playground, but it'll also happen now with us at home. The child knowing that you're here, knowing that you're available, but being able to act on their own and not have to have you around. For example, I think your one can do things when you're around without necessarily engaging you, needing you to be part of the activity. But when you leave and the child is alone, very quickly they may become he may become distressed, or he may go seeking your presence, not necessarily to get you to do anything, just to be around.
Yeah, I've got 4 kids, and my wife recently bought a trapeze for our front yard. Mm-hmm. And watching, for instance, yesterday, my in-laws drive off as my youngest twin had his legs wrapped over the bar and was waving with both of his other hands. It was one of those things where it was like, oh man, I kind of just closed my eyes, but I didn't say anything to him because he was perfectly secure. But it was one of those times I was like, oh, I really hope he doesn't fall and, break his neck. But, I was supporting him by being there, and not saying the things that I wanted to say.
That is a great example. And I think you did exactly the right thing, because if you started to get anxious about it, if you started to worry and shared and presented your anxiety to him, he would become anxious, and he would become, if it's any support for you, I did exactly the same thing. Up until my daughter, when she was climbing on things or whatever, I would sort of watch and not watch at the same time. But when she was not in college, in high school, she went on an outward bound kind of thing. And she showed me one picture of her rock climbing about 30 feet up on this rock face, although with ropes and things like that. I looked at one picture and I never spoke to her again about it, because my anxiety, I still can get anxious thinking about her doing that. But you don't want to share that anxiety with the child. I think one of the things for COVID for the adults is that certainly most adults are anxious about it, worry about what to do, can they go out or whatever. And that anxiety is one of the things we end up sort of sharing, or the child reads our anxiety and they pick up on that anxiety. And that's one of the difficulties that we all have of being at home with our kids and with our partners, is that the anxiety is contagious amongst us, and we need to be aware that what the children really need is a sense of security. The 1-year-old just needs you around. A 5-year-old, what's going on with the virus, because they have some kind of understanding about it, and may need to hear some of the detail. The masks we're careful, who we see. They don't need too much information, but they need some other information that helps them feel safe.
Dr. Tronick, you touched a little bit on social media. You said you're not on social media, but in your research, what is the connection between anxiety, depression, and social media?
It's not something that I've researched directly, but I do read the reports that people who really get locked into social media may have some issues around mood or depression. I'm a little skeptical about that research, but to the extent that it might be true, my concern is that the individuals who, how to choose a word, become overly involved and overly, maybe the word is something like addicted to the media, that what's really going on for them is that, in fact, they're not having the kind of interactions and face-to-face contact and relationships that come in other probably good relationships on social media. But I don't think you can only have relationships on social media. I think even now, having relationships which involve Zoom or phone calls or perhaps seeing people at a social distance, going out and having some other forms of social engagement really individuals need that kind of variety of social engagements. Social engagement is fundamental to children's development, and it's fundamental to adult functioning. So a challenge of this COVID situation is the isolation that we're feeling, what you asked earlier, the distance, how to maintain relationships with other people. But using technology is something that can help. But I think we also need to have try to have a variety of ways of interacting and engaging with others.
What do you think happens when technology creates relationships and friendships rather than, like you said earlier, checking in with people from time to time on the phone, meeting in person? What happens when technology creates relationships?
Technology creating relationships can be a way of creating a relationship, but it has, whatever the technology it is, be it the phone, or be it social media, or be it Zoom, or some other, I remember when the word Zoom was then associated with a really fast car. So you'd see Zoom and then you'd see some really fast car. So we've lost the meaning of that word as far as I'm concerned. But these kind of technologies that we have all have limitations. We can gain certain kinds of information from each other this way, but there are all sorts of things that are not being conveyed and not missing. So you hear my vocalizations, the prosody in my voice, the content of what I'm saying, and that makes for some kind of connection and sharing of experience between us. But at the same time, you're not seeing my gestures. You're not seeing times where I'm making a facial expression, some negative facial expression or a questioning kind of facial expression. And even if we were on Zoom or a video kind of conference, there would be other things going on. For example, there's this really short delay between speech, vocalizations on video, and seeing leads to a kind of a sort of micro, small disorientation in terms of our relating to one another. And certainly there are the big, breaks that we see on the videos that really disrupt the conversation that's ongoing. Also, when we're looking at videos, most of us tend to be in one position, holding one position. So you miss the big body movements that normally would occur. So information isn't complete on one medium. And if you're only relating to an individual on one medium, then you're restricted to the information that comes through on that medium, and other information that we're really built to absorb, which comes from being in the presence of other people, doesn't come through.
I guess to kind of end the interview, I want to touch on the still face experiment, because that's what you are known for. I mean, you're a legend in your field because of the still face experiment. So how about you walk us through the still face experiment and apply it to today's technological age, people working at home, and how whether technology has recreated the still face paradigm for couples and family at home.
The still face experiment, not unlike this moment of break in our contact because of the technology, still face experiment was one where I wanted to explore how active infants were in their interaction, if they were really socially responsive, if they were really emotionally responsive. And I had been looking at the face-to-face interactions between infants and parents, doing analyses of those from the videos. But I wanted to do an experiment to see if infants really were responding to the emotional expressions of their mothers or fathers and the gestures and the like. And so I thought a big distortion, a big perturbation would be just to ask the adult not to respond to the infant. And from the very first infant that we looked at, we saw the reaction. The infants almost immediately pick up on the fact that the parent is not interacting. Again, not unlike this break in the technology that we just had, which was barely 3 or 4 seconds. I picked up on it right away. Infants pick up on the fact that their parent isn't responding very quickly. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. And as soon as they pick up on it, their emotional expression changes. They may look away, but very quickly they come back and they try to solicit the parent's attention again. And they keep on trying. Although some sad, they turn away, they kind of give up on the interaction. Critically, when the parent comes back and starts to interact again, the infants immediately pick up on the fact that the parent is back and interacting, and very quickly they're able to resume the kind of playful interactions we normally see from them. So in a way, the still face became a model for the idea that typical ongoing interactions have small breaks in them, and we quickly repair them. The still face is a big mismatch, is a big distortion, but very quickly the parent and the infant can repair the interaction. The still face has something very special about it, or very particular about it, which is that the infant and the parent, and by the way, I've done this with adults where we have adults role play the still face. So one person is told, okay, you're the mother, here's your baby, you're going to have a conversation with them. They don't have to act like a baby or act like a mother, but get an ongoing conversation going. And then I tell the mother to not interact, the person role playing the mother, to not interact with her role-playing child. The effects are the same, even though both individuals, both adults, know exactly what's going to have to happen. There's no deception. They hear what the procedure is in front of each other. And when they act it out, the adult acting like the infant feels angry, feels frustrated, feels confused, feels panicky. And the person acting out the role of the mother feels guilty, feels bad. Sometimes the adult who played the still-faced mother actually apologizes for what she did, even though it's an experiment where we're telling them what to do. So you get a sense of how basic this connection is. But the connection in the still face is where one person is right in front of the other person. You're set to interact with this other person. And so it's different when someone picks up a cell phone and leads to a break in the interaction, because the infant and the adult recognizes that the person is doing something else. In the still face, the person who's doing the still face is conveying the message, I'm here to interact, and then they don't interact. And the person who's the infant or playing the infant is caught in this message where they say, you're telling me to interact, but now you're not interacting. What's going on here? And I think when we're, at home now with other people other people around us, there are times that we're interacting and we, in some sense, want to and demand reaction on the part of the other person. But there are other times that we're doing other things and we all recognize is doing our own thing. So they're not equivalent. I don't think we've recreated the still face in this pandemic situation. I think if anything, even with people around us, we've created a sense of isolation. You asked at the beginning what I would suggest around emotional regulation. I think one of the best things you can do if there are other people around is have a time set aside where you get together and socially interact rather than do all the work, to just talk about what was going on. Nothing, no big deal. What were you doing today? The things we used to do, but in a sense, didn't need to set aside time to do it on.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Edward Tronick, thank you so much for coming on the Work From Home show. He's a distinguished university professor of psychology and director of the Child Development Unit at UMass Boston. He was the head researcher of the renowned Still Face experiment, which he just talked about in depth, and best-selling co-author of the new book, very relevant to our current situations all around the world. The book is called The Power of Discord: Why the Ups and Downs of Relationships Are the Secret to Building Intimacy, Resilience, and Trust. Highly recommend our listeners check that out. Dr. Tronick, do you have any final thoughts or anything else that you want to promote to our listeners?
I think the one thing I would suggest is that what I've seen in relationships, that they're not perfect, that they involve a lot of back and forth, they involve a lot of mismatches, and out of these mismatches we build trust in the other person, and we build intimacy with the other person, and we even create something new. If you're always doing the same interaction, nothing new is coming out of it. So you need this kind of messiness to have, in a sense, a really good relationship and a creative relationship. So I would just suggest to people to give up the idea of everything being smooth, everything being perfect. It certainly is harder to do now than it ever was before, but to actually see the kind of typical messiness that we all get into as really something positive, as something building a relationship. It's not a problem in a relationship. It's a way to make relationships stronger and to make them better. So we can all kind of relax in things getting disorganized and messy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tronick, for coming on the Work From Home show. We greatly appreciate your insight and analysis. It's been worthwhile for sure. For all our listeners, umb.edu if you want to find out more about Dr. Tronick and his work, and UMass Boston, umb.edu, and our website, workfromhomeshow.com. That's www.workfromhomeshow.com. Get on our mailing list. We're giving away all sorts of free stuff. If you get on our mailing list, contact us, leave us a review on iTunes or Spotify or whatever podcasting platform you use. And if you have any questions, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. That's hello@workfromhomeshow.com if you want to get in touch with us. And until next time, keep on working from home.